Chapter 91, Chapter 91, Dark Land Battle, Peach. Chapter 91, Dark Land Battle, Peach. The Grand Unity Army had just about reached the castle. That same castle that Peach herself had been kidnapped and held hostage in time and time again. It was just about a second home at this point, for all the time she spent there. She honestly didn't have that many ill feelings towards the castle itself. Towards the fact that she was imprisoned in dark, damp cells or narrow bedrooms with a window too small to see out of, the fact she was forced to undergo wedding preparations for weeks while in captivity here on not one, but 3 occasions before the Mario Bros. Could save her. Now that was what she had ill feelings towards. Of course, it turned out that she did end up marrying the very same woman who kept kidnapping her, making all of that silly. But she didn't regret feeling the hate she did. She didn't love Bowsette then, because Bowsette treated her badly and with little regard. Once she earned her respect, that was when their real relationship could finally start. Peach and her Knights of the Toadstool had mostly been a side force to the action since they arrived in Dark Land, not because they were weak, but because the other armies of the 7 generals were just that strong. Well, the 4 generals now that Whomp King and Flutter were gone, and Dr. Krieger had been kicked out for his stupid inventions malfunctioning. It wasn't that big a force at this point, was it? But they were almost here, and it was all going to work. A bunch of ravenous piranha plants emerged from the ground suddenly, but the knight acted quickly and without mercy, slicing their stems off and disabling the creatures immediately. Any threat that came within any close distance to their Lady Peach was to be eviscerated with no hesitation. One of the soldiers, Lucky Lulu, had equipped her hammer suit and floated up with her cloud to get a better vantage point. Now that the castle was upon them, there were several entrance points they could take. Lucky Lulu tossed a few pot-shot hammers at some nearby Koopa Troop soldiers, and then came back down.
"I've found an entrance that looks completely unguarded," she said. "Follow me."
"Right on, girl," said Koopa. Peach said over the radio,
"Hey Bowsette? We've found a way into the castle. Care to join us?"
"Just a sec, hun." There was a loud sound of cracking against metal.
"Just getting rid of some charging chucks. Be right over."
Within seconds, Peach saw her wife swoop into the sky, avoiding a few cannonballs and a wrench or two, and then landed on the ground in front of them and skidded to a stop just as she retracted her wings. She had really perfected that stylish landing entrance.
"Let's do this,"
Bowsette said. Peach tightened her grip on her frying pan. They were about to enter the castle, and once they did, fighting Morton was going to become inevitable. She didn't know what to expect, and her heart was plunged in fear. But with one look at her wife, that disappeared. She felt okay. End of chapter. Chapter 92, Chapter 92, Dark Land Battle, King Bowsette. Chapter 92, Dark Land Battle, King Bowsette. The Boo forces had long ago separated from the rest of the army, and were inflicting massive damage on enemies within the defensive towers at the top of Castle Koopa. The cannon operators simply did not know how to deal with a horde of ghosts phasing in and attacking them from inside their own enclosures. King Boo thought this was too easy. Where was the real challenge, man? Thud. 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 Oh, boy. At the roof of the castle stood one mustached man who King Boo knew all too well. None other than King Bob-omb, the noble warrior.
"Give this up,"
King Bob-omb said.
"We don't want to destroy you too badly." Is that really the best taunting dialogue you could have come up with?
King Boo asked.
You've gone completely mundane. Where's the old Bommy I once knew? Do not call me that,
he said.
You do not deserve the right. Not for your treachery. Dude. Bro, guy. You're literally fighting against your own Lordess Bowsette here and allied with our sworn enemy. I am loyal not to the ruler, but to the throne itself,
King Bob-omb said.
That is the vow I made when we defeated Morton Koopa. We made that vow because of Morton Koopa, you idiot. I don't care. I'm going to kill you and everyone here.
100 Bob-ombs emerged, each of them with lit fuses and charging at the Boo forces. Unfortunately for them, the fact that the Boos can pass through solid objects and use their ghostly powers also meant they could simply pass through the bombs and put out the fuses. It was quite simple, really. The worst possible matchup. Far too easy.
Yuck 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 yuck. You know what, Bommy? This is too easy of a fight. I'm going to make it more interesting.
King Boo put on the super crown and became Booette once more. Oh, man, it felt good to be her right now. She was just itching for some satisfaction. She leapt forward and latched onto King Bob-omb at his back.
Get off! Get off!
He shouted. He couldn't actually get her off because his arms were too nubby to do anything about it and she was holding on too well to get thrown off. Booette responded by licking him up and down, causing electrical shocks that disabled him from moving entirely.
Yuck yuck! How do you like that, Bommy? You? What are you? I'm just your neighborhood-friendly Booette. What does that even mean?
Booette jumped off of King Bob-omb and then with one last lash of her tongue, pushed him off a ledge, where he went tumbling to his doom. When he hit the ground, there was a massive and brilliant explosion. Still, far too easy. Booette expected more. End of chapter. Chapter 93, Chapter 93, Bad Father. Chapter 93, Bad Father. Bowsette and Peach and the Knights of the Toadstool had ran through seemingly endless hallways of this bright and forsaken castle. Bowsette had no clue why it was so big, let alone how she had lived here for decades and still had no idea where anything was. The throne room was clearly where Morton laid in wait. That one was obvious. But for now, she was merely looking for anything else in the castle that might prove useful. A laboratory or something.
I could have sworn this floor had something useful,
she muttered.
That's what you said on the last floor,
Peach said.
We don't have a lot of time, you know.
There was one odd-looking door that suddenly triggered a memory for Bowsette. That was the door she had once gone in when they were trying to figure out what to do about Dry Bowser. Man, that was a long time ago. It was locked, but clearly that had no bearing on whether or not she was going to bust the door down. She would have done that if it were unlocked, too. Okay, door busted. What was in this laboratory? Kamek's own laboratory. What didn't surprise Bowsette was the fact this existed. Kamek had 7, maybe even 8 personal facilities in the castle, and this was exactly what she was looking for anyway. What surprised her was the fact that inside some sort of testing tube, hooking up to various machines, was Kamek, very much alive and in very poor condition. Bowsette bashed the machine until it stopped working, and broke the glass to the tube to retrieve him. He was barely conscious, but smiled as he looked up at her.
"Are you an angel?"
he asked.
"Dad, it's me,"
Bowsette said.
"Your only child."
Kamek weakly smiled. His vision was non-existent.
"That's not
Cough.
true. I raised Claudia for most of her teenage years, no." "Well, don't try to make it all creepy all of a sudden,"
she mumbled to herself.
"Dad, I thought you were dead." "I certainly feel it." "What were they doing to you? Why were you in that machine?" "They were extracting my magic for their experiment. I couldn't stop them." "You mean Morton?"
Bowsette asked.
"Morton and that mad science Stein."
So he wasn't dead at all. He was in on it. Not that that really changed much.
"And they needed your magic for that?" 2 years I was in that thing. You don't understand, my child."
Kamek was seriously injured after being absolutely sucked dry in his very soul.
"I'm so sorry for bringing Morton back. I'm so sorry for not being there for you. I was such a bad father."
He passed out.
"Take him to a medic, you two,"
Bowsette said to Kupiku and Lucky Lulu. They took Kamek and went off.
"Now, is there anything else in here that might, well, help us?" "Hey! You guys! Back off the merchandise or else!"
Bowsette turned to see several Koopa trolls, along with 2 figures holding magic Koopa wands pointed directly towards them. It was Roy and Larry.
My babies! My babies!"
The motherhood instinct inside her overrode any sense of self-preservation and she flew over to them, hugging them both and tackling them to the ground simultaneously. At the same time, the Koopa trolls took off running away. When they both got back up, she then slapped them both back to the ground.
"Why are you dumbasses siding with the bad guy?"
she asked. Larry, smarter than he looked, made the connection immediately.
"Pops! That you? It's Mom now. And I ain't taking your shit about ambition or whatever. Your siblings were fighting to save this kingdom, and here you were siding with the enemy. Why?"
Roy sniffled.
Ludwig said, "I could never be king." "You can't,"
Bowsette said.
"After this stunt, you two and all your descendants for the rest of time are removed from the line of succession. Bam! Done. Gone." "Ah!"
they moaned simultaneously.
"Shoulda thought about it before you let friggin' Lemmy get ahead of you. You always preferred Bowser Jr. anyway,"
Larry complained. She ignored that remark and then hugged them both again.
"All of your brothers are outside in the middle of the battle. Do you know where Wendy might be?"
They looked at each other with mournful expressions.
"She got cursed." "Take me there."
They led the group to another room on a floor closer to the throne room, where dozens of statues of prominent dissident figures were on display, from General Guy to Tough Wiggler to some weird-looking spiky Koopa. And then the big two, Bowsette's grandmother Cammy and her daughter Wendy.
"Is there any way to fix this?"
Peach asked.
"What's Princess Peach doing here?"
Roy asked.
We got married, long story, already explained it to the non-traitor Koopalings. No time now.
She stared at the stone statues and thought deeply. Surely, with her magical prowess, and the Koopa-based magic of this curse. Bowsette touched both of the statues with her hands and focused, pouring as much of herself into them as she could. She felt a surge of energy, she felt her blood. Every bit of celestial blood in her veins vibrated and sparkled within her. And all that energy moved forward into her fingertips. With one blast of magic, the curse was lifted. The two of them were revived. And then Bowsette fell to the ground, gasping for air. That was not a good idea to do right before facing down the toughest enemy of her life. She was really going to regret that, she thought. Just kidding. Because the two most important women in her life were back. Besides Peach, kind of. She hugged them both, and Larry and Roy joined in. Once again, she explained the Bowsette situation, and the Bowsette toadstool situation, for what felt like the 80th time in recent days. The two women were immediately understanding of it, even if Bowsette had no clue Cammy would be able to withstand such a big change in her life. She really underestimated her.
So,
Cammy said.
You've truly graduated, Bowsette my dear. You have become a dragon witch, just like I always wanted. Ka. Oh, Grandma.
Bowsette turned to Wendy.
I'm so proud of you for trying to do the right thing, even if it almost got you killed. You are a real hero, unlike these two jerks right here. Geez.
Roy said.
Oh, it was nothing,
Wendy said.
Do I get to become queen now? We'll talk about that later.
That was her way of avoiding the fact that right now Iggy was really looking like the one who could rule Dark Land in the future, which was an unexpected turn and actually really cool. Succession didn't matter though until they defeated the current ruler.
So if there's nothing left in this castle to find,
Bowsette said,
we're going to meet up with the other Koopalings. And we're going to bash that stupid Morton's skull in.
End of chapter. Chapter 94, Chapter 94, Bash his skull in. Chapter 94, Bash his skull in. Now this was the moment everything had lead up to. The group inside the castle had regrouped with the others in the Grand Unity Army, made sure that the battle outside was stable, and then a select group re-entered the castle right into the front entrance. The throne room. The 8 Koopalings, Iggy, Larry, Roy, Morton Jr., Bowser Jr., Wendy, Ludwig, and a newly recovered Lemmy, went inside with their mother Bowsette, their stepmother Peach, and their great-grandmother Cammy hovering on a broomstick above. Peach's knights followed her in as well. But besides them, everyone else was still fighting outside. This was a family affair. Peach was ready. She could feel Bowsette's heat emanating from a foot away, she was burning so hot. And that was all she needed to keep going. There sitting on the throne was the gargantuan beast of ash and bones, the undead Morton Koopa himself. She had seen him once before, back at the Crystal Palace, but in the heat of the moment she hadn't been able to gauge just how massive he was. Even when Bowsette was in her Koopa form, she was still less than half the size of her biological father. That axe that they had retrieved. It truly was made just for him, wasn't it?
I've been expecting you for so long, my dear daughter,
Morton said.
And you brought the whole family along. I'm so proud that you have finally been able to unite like this. Because you will all together be able to witness what I have discovered in my journey with the afterlife. You're never going to resurrect a Dreadlord,
Bowsette said. She pulled out her chomp shell weapon, which was glowing with a dark blackness.
On the contrary,
he retorted.
You seem to presume much. All I'm gonna presume is how we're gonna kick your ass.
Morden stood up, and his stature was even greater now that he was on his feet. He was a true monster.
I have no ass,
he said.
I am a pile of bones. Koopalings, assemble!
Iggy shouted. All 8 of them struck a pose together and then pulled out their magic Koopa wands. They summoned their clown cars and began flying around while shooting magic beams at Morden. Many of them collided, but none had any effect. Magic spells didn't work on those with no soul, no blood, it seemed. Morden roared, shaking the throne room. In one corner, a statue of Bowsette as a Koopa cracked and fell to the ground. Peach raised her frying pan and then jumped forward, along with the rest of her knights. Without her dress, she thought she would have lost the ability to float, but it appeared that it was not the clothes that made the woman, it was the woman whose innate magical abilities had gone pretty much untapped her whole life because she was a pampered rich girl. Geez, she could have been a wizard, if only she were born poor. She went right for the head of the beast, the unsightly skull that made up his awful face, and bashed it in as many times as she could. It didn't seem to be doing anything. Even her gusts of wind made absolutely no effect on him. In fact, he was putting all his notice on Bowsette, and Bowsette alone. To get rid of Peach, he just swatted his arm, knocking her and most of her knights to the ground. One had managed to reach him and hack a sword right into him, getting his weapon stuff in the bone, just in time for Morden to grab him and fling him out a window, disappearing into the sky with a sparkling star. Peach suddenly didn't want to fight this guy anymore. Bowsette, for what it was worth, was putting up a valiant effort. She attacked him with her chomp shell, launching it forward and reeling it in rapid succession like it were some giant yo-yo. The attacks kept Morden from advancing forwards towards her and allowed the Koopalings to continue attacking, launching cannonballs and throwing small mecha Koopas on him. None of it was working, though. With one ill-timed chomp throw, Morden finally caught the weapon, pulled it out of her hands, and then tossed it back at her, smashing her in the head and knocking her 20 feet backwards.
Bowsette!
Peach shouted. She ran after her wife but was struck backwards by a giant bony hand smacking her away. It was funny. She didn't even feel any pain as she flew into the air. It was almost peaceful seeing her vision stretch out around her like this. Right until she hit the wall and the shockwave cracked the wall behind her. A few months ago, that would have been the end of Peach Toadstool. She would hardly have been able to survive that kind of blow and end up in the hospital for the rest of her life. But with her training in combat and magic, with her love, she wasn't going down that easily. She leaned against her weapon and stumbled back onto her feet. Peach growled, as fierce a roar as a mere human being could muster, and then held out both her hands to activate herself. The earth shook beneath them, and the castle quaked. Even Morden was caught off guard. And when Peach pulled down her hands with great force, collapsing the stone roof of the throne room upon him, he hadn't even been able to figure out what was going on. Morden was buried under the rubble. And that gave time for the others to recover, at least 4. Roar. He was too strong. He had gotten up without appearing to have any damage on him whatsoever. His dead, red eyes were now fixated on Peach herself.
You know, I liked your father,
Morden said, approaching her with a toothy snarl. The knights charged him again, but he swatted them away without changing his gaze.
I installed him over his brothers because he was willing to work with me and concede any territories I needed. I bet he felt really desperate once I was gone, facing a new, unpredictable ruler, not like the one who the toadstools had allied with for 10 generations. And I bet that's how the Mushroom Kingdom was plunged into this endless conflict with Dark Land. Because your feckless father had no clue how to operate without my malevolent direction to steer him. Then it's a good thing I'm not my father,
Peach said. She chucked her frying pan at Morton and it dinged him on the forehead. No reaction.
No, because your father would have known his place as the subservient to the dark ruler of the planet Earth. He wouldn't have died in a fiery inferno from his opponent's magical breath.
With this, Morton opened his mouth wide, readying himself for a blast of flames that would incinerate Peach. She closed her eyes and held out her hands, as if she could stop against it with some sort of magic, and then he stopped. The ground shook again, but it wasn't Peach. Morton turned around and saw Bowsette holding out one of her hands, glowing with fire and anger at once.
Get out of here,
Bowsette said. And then out of the ground burst the Bone Dragon, Bowsette's personal monstrous pet. Each of its 3 heads began attacking Morton, and had grabbed him away from Peach with their mouths. If he had had any meat on him, they surely would have made quick work of him. Peach took this moment to get out of the action and limp to a place of safety. Those knights that could still stand surrounded her and took guard over her. The Koopalings were mostly defeated by now, lying on the ground in various states of injury, but Iggy was still blasting the same useless magical wand attacks at his grandfather. It was all up to Bowsette and her monster now.
Ka 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 ka.
Bowsette laughed as she summoned fireballs to her palms and chucked them in rapid succession. She now had the upper hand, and she wasn't going to let. Morton took hold of one of the Bone Dragon's necks with his hands, squeezed it, and snapped it in half, chunks of calcium falling to the floor. The monster and its 2 remaining heads panicked, but it was only seconds before Morton swiped another head off with his claws. With one pile driver to its body, the entire Bone Dragon was obliterated. He sent a beam of fire at Bowsette and knocked her to the ground as well.
Kukukukiko,
Morton laughed.
Bowsette, my daughter. You don't realize that you were never supposed to be here to win. From the very beginning, you were here to lose. Your destiny was to fall here. I'm not listening to some dumb zombie,
she said as she tried to get back up again. He kicked her back down to prevent that.
Now that you're here, though, I can finally begin my ultimate plan,
he said.
I've been waiting years for this. Or, rather, my entire lifetime. To bring back a Dreadlord from the dead just to end the world. What? What? What are you talking about?
Morton asked.
I'm not bringing a Dreadlord back from the dead. I'm unlocking the Dreadlord inside of you.
End of chapter. Chapter 95, Chapter 95, Dreadlord. Chapter 95, The Dreadlord.
Dreadlord. Inside of. What?
Bowsette wasn't sure if she misheard him or what, because that made no sense.
You can't be that stupid,
Morton said.
Surely it crossed your mind that that celestial blood inside of us is not as innocuous or noble as it seems. You and I, your children, our ancestors. We are all that's left of the Dreadlords.
This really hadn't crossed her mind whatsoever, not the entire time she had been King Koopa, not in the entire time she had been searching for a way to stop her father from resurrecting the malevolent dragons that had conquered the planet eons ago. And it finally made complete sense. The royal Koopas surely didn't descend from some benevolent spacefaring dragons that graced their presence on Earth, but only ever so briefly. They had come directly from the evil forces that were defeated and sealed away, the planet's ultimate villains. Bowsette was a bad guy because it was in her blood. What a pathetic excuse. At this moment, Bowsette summoned all the strength she had and got back to her feet. She took out the axe that she had gotten from Claudia Koopa, the axe that might have had the residual energy of the Firestone amulet inside of it. She jumped and swung it with all her strength. And Morton caught the weapon with his hands before the blade count touch him. He laughed.
Kukukukiko. Arg.
Bowsette struggled to break free and lodge the weapon in his skull. She had to win. She had to. But. Morton shook her off. The weapon was too big to keep a firm grip of, and Bowsette fell to the ground again, losing the last of her ability to fight back as her back hit the ground again. Morton now had his own axe back in his grasp. It was all over for them. Not a single combatant was left standing in the throne room, as close as they had gotten. The armies outside could surely invade, but now that he had his axe back, it was not going to be pretty.
I was not lying when I said I needed you or Morton Jr. for these rituals,
the bony dragon told her.
You two, my son and daughter, are all I have left.
At this, Morton Jr., currently lying on the floor in pain, gave a confused expression and then began to mentally work out the implications of what he just said.
You have the highest concentration of royal blood running through your veins simply because you are from an older generation. Because there are no more dread lords left to mate with, it is simply a matter of math to know that I should attempt this experiment first on one of you. And you, Bowsette, are the perfect candidate. Why is that? You've already begun unlocking your true potential. Everything you've accomplished since you gained your human form makes me realize this is going to work. We can bring back the creature inside of all royals. We can conquer the planet once more.
At this, a giant machine emerged from underneath the throne itself. Bowsette really wished the bone dragon had destroyed that when it was emerging from underground and attacking everything.
Using the remains of your bone dragon, this machine, and the magic within you, I will be able to transform you into a dread lord,
Morton said.
And you will revert to your basal instincts, rampaging around the planet and preparing to drill into the core of the planet to brood for your next offspring. After millions die in that effort, I will transform each of your children into dread lords as well. 8 dragons on one planet. It will be a beautiful sight, won't it?
Bowsette realized all of that talk about her children not having any significant powers because Bowsette had married commoners was yet another ruse to throw her off the real secrets behind everything. And that Bowsette's siblings, who had all apparently died in combat fighting against each other and against Morton himself, were probably the first round of failed experiments. Why in Brighton's name did Merlin not tell her all of this when he first captured her over 2 years ago? That guy really was the worst person of all time. The machine began to whir, and an aura of magical energy formed around it. This must have been what Kamek had been tortured and magically drained for, a weapon of pure transformational energy. The aura soon compressed until it was just a tiny ball of bright light.
I wanted nothing more than to transform myself into a dread lord,
Morton admitted.
After everything, though, I am simply glad to bring back our family's honor. We are not Koopas. We are monsters. And that's what this is all about. The honor of monstrosity.
The ball expanded and a beam of magic shot out and hit Bowsette. Her pupils contracted and the super crown above her head shattered into a million pieces. She hadn't even begun to transform back into a Koopa before the world began to shift around her. And inside her, there was a surge of electricity in her veins. And then everything went white. End of chapter. Chapter 96, Chapter 96, Celestial. Chapter 96, Celestial. Long ago, out from the stars, dragons arrived on Earth. They made it their temporary home, charting its lands, observing its people, and become familiar with one species in particular, the Koopa. A union of love, or of passion, or even of mere curiosity, it resulted in the most powerful race the Earth had ever seen, the Royal Koopa. Even after the celestial dragons had left the planet, off to explore the next uncharted world on their endless path through infinite space, their descendants remained, conquering the lands and serving to advance the world in its growth in technology, science, magic, and culture. That was the story Bowsette had been told all her life. That was the story she was sure most of her ancestors had been told all their lives. But no, they were sorely mistaken about their origins. In reality, long ago, from eggs burrowed deep in the core of the Earth burst forth massive, hulking monstrosities known as the Dread Lords. They had no destination, no motivation, no goal except consumption and destruction. Like a deadly virus they rampaged across the Earth, obliterating what they could and terrorizing what they couldn't. The species that had made their home here tried to fight back, but their technology, their magic too primitive, their wills too weak. Caught up in this madness, a Dread Lord must have mated with a Koopa and somehow this unholy union formed a disgusting half-breed offspring. The Dread Lords themselves were killed and sealed away by forces unknown to this day in some fateful battle whose name and details have been lost to time, but this half-breed and its descendants lived on, escaping the turmoil of destruction for long enough that their progenitors had faded into memory. And then when the time was right, they became monsters in their own rights. Bowsette was just the second weakest generation of these Dreadlord half-breeds. Every time a royal Koopa mated with a Koopa, it cut the amount of remaining celestial blood for any offspring in half. And with no Dreadlords left, that meant that it was inevitable that they would eventually phase out of existence, their powers and abilities fizzling into nothing. Until now. She felt a massive rush of energy deep within her, touching every fiber of her being and stretching herself out. She felt herself growing even though she could see nothing. Her wings, before retractable and within her shell, were bursting forth into massive structures. They hit some sort of barrier, probably the remaining walls of the throne room, but the barriers crumbled against them. Her claws stretched out many feet, and her snout grew forward with 100 teeth sprouting to join it. She was becoming a Dread Lord, losing the Koopa part of her identity and embracing the monster within. This was the end for her, then. Bowsette as a person, as a wife, as a mother, was now gone. Bowsette was now a nameless beast destined to destroy the planet. She decided to accept this transformation with equanimity, her consciousness fading as the dragon took over and discarded that being. There was nothing she could do about it. After all this work she had done to redeem herself, everything she had done to stop her past from destroying the present, it turned out that she was going to be the one who destroyed the present anyway. It was almost funny, or it would be if she had the capacity to laugh anymore. Instead, she felt like she had sunken deep into the nothingness around her, losing any ability to sense or feel the body she was in control of just moments ago. This was the end. No. Not it wasn't. Bowsette wasn't the same person she used to be. Giving up, letting herself be defeated and blaming it on the inevitability of failure was not what she did anymore. She had too much to live for, too much to protect to allow this to happen. She wasn't letting some shitty magic spell take over her entire body. It was hers, after all. Nobody else was allowed to control it. Even if her body became that of a dragon's, she wasn't just going to take this like some chump who gave up at the slightest inconvenience. She was stronger than that. She had hardly unlocked her true potential already, and she wasn't letting that true potential just unlock inside of her without being able to control it for herself. Even though she could see nothing around her, even though she was seemingly lost within her own mind, she reached out. She summoned forth all the rage, all the determination she could muster, and roared out.
My name is Bowsette, and this is my life you're dealing with, you dipshit dragon. Give me back myself.
Suddenly, she could see again. She towered over the throne room she was previously in, standing about 40 feet tall and currently breathing fire out into the sky. It hit one of the remaining airships and sent it crashing to the ground. No, this was stupid. She took one look at herself and knew this was a body she would hate to be in. So, she was going back. That was that. End of chapter. Chapter 97, Chapter 97, that was that. Chapter 97, that was that. With all of Bowsette's willpower, she tapped into her own blood, sensing every single vein, every pulse of her heart, and let it bubble inside of her. If Morton Koopa wanted to turn her into a dragon that would destroy the earth, then she would do the exact inverse of that. She would become the dragon that would protect the earth. Bowsette shrunk down from a 30-story megamonster back down to the human shape she had once attained. Now she was just a miniature monster and looked phenomenally stupid like this. The super crown had shattered, but it had done so at precisely the right moment for that beam to hit. She could still feel its magic inside of her. It was like she could now shape-shift at will, or at least at this exact moment. She wasn't going to let herself live as something she hated, so she transformed again. She let her features shift around her, focusing not on one particular image of what she wanted to look like, but the feeling inside of her as her body warped and twisted. She wanted to feel warm, to feel like the woman she really was. And it worked. She was no longer able to attain a half-human form, but that didn't matter. Because as she solidified herself, she became exactly what she felt like she was missing in all her life. Her tail, her shell, her wings, her horns, they were all here at appropriate lengths. Her claws sharpened, and she felt scales hardening across her body. The flames in her veins coursed through every pore and steamed out of her body, sending up smoke around her. This was it. A Koopa body, in the shape of a human's. One she was satisfied with. One that felt right. Felt natural. She was no longer a Koopa inside a human shell. She was no longer enhanced by a power-up. She was her own power-up. A hybrid of the two forms that made her the most powerful, the most proud she could ever be. Bowsette smiled. The entire scene around her was silent, as if these past few moments had been a complete shock to everyone here. It shouldn't have been, Bowsette was too strong to let some stupid magic destroy her. She pointed with a fierce finger towards the pile of bones known as Morton Koopa.
You got it all wrong, she said. You thought that my life, the lives of your family were yours to control. Just because we have the same blood does not mean we have the same lives. I am not your experimental subject. I am a woman and I am stronger than anything you can ever throw at me. How? What did you?
Morden was completely at a loss for words to retort. Without any further hesitation, Peach ran to Bowsette's side and grabbed her hand. She really didn't need to do that with how injured she was, but it was highly appreciated.
Morden Koopa, I am going to destroy you and take back the throne of Darkland,
Bowsette said.
Any last words before you crumble into dust? What? Guess not, then.
Bowsette lifted a hand and her chomp shell rose from the ground somewhere in the throne room and levitated into her hand.
It's time to unleash the glory of Bowsette.
End of chapter. Chapter 98, Chapter 98, The Glory of Bowsette. Chapter 98, The Glory of Bowsette. Somehow, Bowsette's transformation into her true self had re-energized the combatants around here. The Koopalings, all 8 of them, sprung to their feet. Peach and the Knights of the Toadstool hobbled back up and charged once again. Bowsette extended wings from inside her shell and took off into the air, igniting her entire body in fire. She collided with Morden and knocked him onto the ground, the first moment of real damage to the man since the battle began. Something inside of Bowsette had always been there, and now it was awake. Not at any point in her life until now had she realized what she truly was. Not the weakling descendant of ancient dragons, whether they were cosmonauts or terrorizers. Not some girl wearing a power-up suit. Not when she was waging a revolution, or when she was putting down Shisei's rebellion, or when she was taking over the Mushroom Kingdom any number of times. The true power inside of her was herself. Because Bowsette was Bowsette. And that meant there were no limits to be had. Because any limits that she found, she would break. She always did. Morden stopped his meandering and got into full fighting mode, getting into his shell and spinning around. It knocked into a wall and obliterated any remaining source that this ever used to be part of the castle. They were fully outside now. And that was probably for the best, because now the entire Grand Unity army was in the vicinity, with a clear shot at the 16-foot undead monster in the middle of the rubble and destruction. And the entire army charged. Boom Boom was the first one to enter the battle, spinning into a top and unleashing a flurry of fists at Morden's feet. He swung his axe and hit the stone floor in a crack, but his weapon was too slow to hit him. King Boo and his hundreds of ghosts swarmed the room and trapped him in some sort of barrier of ghostly magics. He couldn't move outside this barrier, not until he swung his axe and evaporated a good 30 of them in one blow. Now infused with fury, he sent a blast of fire in all directions, turning his head in a full 360-degree spin and trying to kill as many people as possible. Bowsette took this moment to extend her chomp shell chain and begin the final assault. Instead of bashing it against Morden, which seemed to be as useless as normal, she decided to make further use of the Zetar-infused power within her weapon that absorbed the energy, magical or otherwise, out of anything it impacted with. Its dark black glow was absolutely iridescent at this point, and she realized that it was soon going to be ready for its special attack. So she smashed it right against the axe in Morden's hands. It hit the weapon and bounced backwards, nearly hitting Bowsette herself in the face as it swung towards her, and then hit the axe on the other side. With each thud, the chomp shell grew brighter, even if the axe didn't seem to be affected. There was some magic left in the thing after all, even if it didn't look like it. Morden noticed what was happening and flipped the axe upside down, holding the steel hit forwards and jabbing it towards Bowsette. She swiped it away with her claws and then jumped on the hilt itself. This thing was only 6 inches in diameter, and actually balancing on it was next to impossible, but Bowsette was done with thinking anything was impossible. She ran up the hilt of the axe and reached the side closest to Morton himself, where the cutting edge of the axe was facing the ground right at his chest. She whipped it and struck the end of the handle. The axe head itself was disattached and fell to the ground, striking Morton in the foot and cutting off his toe claws. Morton could not feel pain, clearly, but he felt very obvious rage at this. He dropped the remains of the axe and jumped backwards. With a piercing roar, he did something unexpected. He grabbed Morton Jr. and held him up to him.
"Stop right there, all of you. I'm not giving up now,"
Morton said.
"Mom! Help!"
Morton Jr. shouted. Boom Boom took the opportunity to attack while everyone else had halted, but Morton kicked him, launching him so far he flew past the curvature of the earth.
"I'm going to finish a ritual one way or another, even if it ends up killing all of you. If I can't have a Dread Lord, then at least I'll bring myself back to life. And my dear son is the best way to make that happen."
He clutched Morton tighter, and a new aura of magical energy burst forth, making Morton Jr. scream out in pain while everyone else stood by helplessly. There was only one thing Bowsette thought to do. With no inclination as to how effective it might be or how stupid it might be, she marched over to Peach, grabbed her hand, and prayed. End of chapter. Chapter 99, Chapter 99 The Power of the Royal Spirit. Chapter 99, The Power of the Royal Spirit. Morton was currently sucking the life out of Morton Jr. in some sick magical ritual. In just minutes, or even seconds, he would be fully revived as a Koopa, able to destroy the entire army before him in a moment's glance. Bowsette knew she wouldn't be able to take the steps necessary to break through that magical force field, attack, and successfully pry Morton from her child before the ritual was complete. This man was too determined at this point, already having given up on his plan to turn all 9 of them into Dread Lords to destroy the planet. So instead she took her wife's hands, pressed her forehead against hers, and prayed out.
"If you can hear this, anyone, we need your help,"
she shouted.
"Star spirits! Brighton! Twila! Oh-ho! Anyone!"
Peach cried.
"Bowsette! We have to do this together! We have to try!"
Bowsette took one hand from her wife and then both of them faced Morton himself. A new magical aura started to form around them, one that counteracted Morton's. It was bright and pink and flickered with the intensity of true power. Soon their magic began engulfing his, and Morton's powers were altogether vanishing. He could no longer absorb the energy out of Morton Jr., and in moments his grip on the boy was released altogether. As a creature of pure magical being, he was frozen completely solid by the aura. Bowsette stepped away from Peach, but the aura remained. She did so slowly, each step making an impacting thud against what was left of the throne room floor. She took out her chomp shell, which was almost fully powered up and ready to launch. She found the head of the axe and bashed it a few more times, shattering it into 1,000 tiny metallic pieces. With this, the chomp shell's black color disappeared, replaced by a bright yellow shimmer. It had become a power star, just as all Zetars did after they absorbed enough positive energy. Bowsette was one and the same with the Zetars. And that's why this was going to be her final blow. She took one last look at Morton Koopa. The biological father who had abandoned her, killed or cursed her siblings, brought great ruin onto the continent. He was unable to move. Unable to utter any menacing last words. unable to do anything but stare forward and accept his face. Bowsette smirked. Then smiled. Then cackled.
Caw 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 caw.
She swung the chomp shell, bashing into Morden's frozen skeleton. The energy of the power star exploded into action, utterly obliterating Morden and sending his bones flying upwards. But the strike was so powerful, so forceful, that each one of them faded into dust as they were sent upwards, dissolving into atoms. He was gone. Holy jeez! The battle had died down completely. It was so quiet you could hear the coughing of the injured, the rustling of rocks in the rubble. After all this time, all this pain and suffering, Morden Koopa had been defeated once again. Once and for all. Bowsette collapsed on the ground, unable to further hold herself up. The same was true for most of the people in the room. But they did so with smiles gleaming from their faces. The Grand Unity Army had won its war, and they deserved a real rest. End of chapter. Chapter 100, Chapter 100, Dark Land in Light. Chapter 100, Dark Land in Light and Bowsette and Peach looked out atop one of Castle Koopa's observation towers, examining the destructive damage that Dark Land had faced in the war to destroy Morden Koopa. It was extensive, but it was nothing that the people of the Koopa troop could not fix. No, Bowsette wasn't going to punish the idiots that stuck with Morden through everything. They were wrapped up in something bigger than they could understand. It was okay if they didn't realize the real reasons behind this civil war or if they succumbed to the powerful fear tactics that her father had used to reign in control. She wouldn't honor those who fell for the useless cause, but those who still lived could rejoin Bowsette's kingdom without any hesitation. That was the way to build a nation.
I've never seen the sunrise in Dark Land, Peach said. It's always, dark every time I come here. It's rare and quick,
Bowsette said.
Even in the summer we only get a few hours of sun each day. We cherish it while we can.
Peach leaned her head against Bowsette's shoulder and they stood there overlooking Dark Land like this for some time. Bowsette had finally found a self she was truly comfortable with. All the time she spent fretting and worrying and second-guessing about what made her happy, about what made her strong, about what made her look feminine, and it took her until now to truly accept that it was her own mind holding her back. She had strove to find happiness in accomplishments and goals, when the real key to happiness was finding something to truly care about and latching onto that. And she had plenty to care about. Her family, her friends, her kingdom, they were all good targets. But of course the real thing she had to care about was herself. Bowsette loved herself. It was as simple as that. And now that she had this new body, a true hybrid between human and Koopa, she felt like she had truly attained some sort of goal here that she hadn't even been searching for. She had never considered that all of these immense Dreadlord abilities simmering inside of her could give her absolute mastery over her own being, and yet once she finally came to accept herself as a woman, as a person, that was when, suddenly, everything just clicked.
So? 2 kids each?
Peach asked.
Not yet,
Bowsette said.
Let's clean up our new kingdom first. Well, if you want to rule by my side, that is. After all of this, Bowsette, you're really just going to go back to being a ruler again like none of this ever happened? Yeah, well.
Bowsette considered this.
I can't be Mario's enemy without being the ruler, right? You'll find a way,
Peach said before kissing her on the cheek.
Actually, I don't want to rule over Dark Land. I already abdicated from the Mushroom Kingdom. House Toadstool is reduced to a single castle in 100 nights. I think I'm done with royalty forever. So you don't want to? Well.
Peach took a deep breath like she was going to tell her something that she had been rehearsing for a while.
I love you. I want to be by your side for the rest of my life. I want to be with your children, even if there's 8 of them and they've all personally kidnapped me at least once. But I don't want to settle down yet. I've loved every moment of the adventures we've had together, and it made me realize something: I need to see the rest of the world. Experience life like a common person would. After Mario saved me from our wedding on the moon, I traveled for a few weeks with Tiara, but it was mostly shallow tourism of the most popular places. I want to do more than that. I want to truly travel the world and see what it has to offer me, and more importantly, what I have to offer it. And so you won't be around as much for a while. Right. I don't know how long it'll be or where I'll even go, but I just want to do something by myself for a little while. It doesn't mean I love you any less or anything, just. I completely understand,
Bowsette said.
If I didn't, then we wouldn't be a good fit for each other, right? You won't be mad at me? You won't be upset if I'm not here while the continent rebuilds itself? If you're happy, that's what matters.
They kissed.
Bowsette. As soon as you come back, we can start a new family. If you still want. But until then, do what you feel is right. Of course.
Bowsette realized that maybe ruling over Dark Land wasn't exactly what she wanted to do, either. She would help the rebuilding process, but she wasn't going to take any firm stances on how the rest of her life was going to go just yet. The future was as bright as the sun and she wanted to make the most of it. Planning too far ahead would just handicap that. They left the observation tower and went down to the throne room, currently being rebuilt by a regiment of Resners and Spikes and being expanded to hold an even bigger audience. Bowsette's entire family was here. The 8 Koopalings, Iggy, Larry, Lemmy, Roy, Wendy, Bowser Jr., Ludwig, and Morton Jr. Cammy Koopa, her grandmother. Kamek Koopa, her father, currently in a wheelchair and still recovering from over a year's worth of magical torture. And then there was Boom Boom and Pom Pom, 2 of her most trusted friends in the world. And of course Peach, her loving wife. It was a crowded family, for sure, but then again, they had an entire castle to themselves, didn't they? Despite everything that happened that could have divided them, Bowsette's selfish abdication, the infighting that broke them apart, the re-emergence of Morton Koopa and the final war that devastated their homeland, they still stuck together strongly, the ultimate royal family. No matter what else happened in the world, as long as Bowsette was happy with herself and had a family worth fighting for, she would be unstoppable. A cameraman Lakitu floated down with a large photography device hanging from his fishing pole.
Are you sure this is the right spot?
He asked.
Exactly the right spot,
Bowsette said.
Make sure to get the construction behind us in full view. Okay then. Everyone strike a pose.
The Lakitu said.
Say, Sleepy Sheep. Sleepy Sheep.
The group said in unison. Snap. Yep, this one was going in Bowsette's Best Memories compilation. The end. Thank you so much for reading The Glory of Bowsette. It's been a really fun time the past 2 weeks as I wrote this story that grew far beyond its original scope. What was supposed to be a humorous one-shot evolved into, well, a full 100,000-word novel, and I'm kind of proud of it for that, warts and all. Even though Wart wasn't in this, I am still astounded that this story could have become as popular as it did. In just 2 weeks, it has reached number 26 on the most popular Mario fan fictions on this site, and over 150 reviews and counting. My appreciation for the support this story has gotten cannot be understated. It's really so cool. If you enjoyed this story, and being on the last chapter you clearly did, or you skipped ahead, in which case, go back and read the rest. I'd like to recommend my other currently running serial story. It's an original fiction sci-fi story called Atlanta, Stories from the Retro Future. And you can find it on Atlanta, DT, Quinlan Circle, DT.com. It's about a 20-something lay about living in the future of the 80s and 90s in the city of Atlanta, given supernatural powers and forced to protect the city against threats that will bring it down. It's got that same mix of comedy and action, world-building and character-driven storytelling as The Glory of Bowsette, but obviously with much higher quality of writing, because I didn't pump the whole thing out in 2 weeks lol. It doesn't have Mario, but it does have comedic backs and forth and over-the-top fight scenes. As for the rest of this story, as far as I'm concerned, the story at hand is finished. I may write an epilogue to tie up a couple more loose ends if there is demand for it, but otherwise, the story of Bowsette Toadstool and her path to self-acceptance has been completed. Well, we'll see. If there's enough favorites and follows in the next few weeks, perhaps. I'm really looking forward to the other currently running Bowsette fan fictions though. On this site here, there's Bolero and A Game of Princesses that are both very good so far, as well as Bowsette Syndrome on AO3. All of these stories have very different approaches to the character, and if you're hankering for more Bowsette, I recommend them. Once again, thank you for reading my story, and I hope to see you again someday on this wild world we call the internet. ~3445 End of chapter.